Good morning, this is Ben Tendo. I'm a clinical psychologist in Las Vegas, and I'm also a huge Nintendo fan. And today I'm going to talk about how video games are helpful with anyone who is struggling with depression. Now, this is something I struggle with personally, so I'm talking about this topic both as a psychologist who's helped others with depression, but also as someone who has struggled with depression myself for many, many years. One of the main ways that depression is treated is through cognitive behavioral therapy. Obviously, there are other approaches, medication and other types of therapy, but I'm a big fan of cognitive behavioral therapy because it really targets the problem and helps us to get a solution. And in cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, the technique is called behavioral activation. That's the main technique for treating depression. And behavioral activation is kind of a fancy term, but all it really means is that you get yourself moving, you get yourself behaving and doing things that help you to feel better. Because when we're depressed, oftentimes we don't want to do anything. We experience what is called anhedonia, another fancy word, which just really means we don't want to do anything. And we lose interest in things, and things that normally bring pleasure stop bringing pleasure. So in behavioral activation, the key is to engage ourselves in activities that have two qualities. And those two qualities are that they are pleasurable and masterful, okay? Pleasurable and masterful. So this can be, pretty much anything that makes us to feel good, and anything that requires developing some kind of a new skill, whether it's a hobby or a skill or even work, just anything that requires some kind of mastery. And the things you choose don't have to be both pleasurable and masterful. It can just be masterful or pleasurable. But if you can find something that gives you pleasure and is masterful, then that's really powerful at treating depression. And an important thing to remember is that when you're super, super depressed and you just don't want to do anything, nothing sounds interesting, nothing sounds good, sometimes you have to kind of push yourself through and just start doing something, and don't expect it to feel good at first. But, at the very least, it may take your mind off other things. So I know that for myself, when I'm depressed, I sometimes don't even want to get out of bed, which is why it's great to have a job, because when you have a job, it forces you to get out of bed. But on the weekend, even now, I'm coming out of a really bad depression, actually, to be honest. It's been about 5 months that I've been extremely depressed. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, for the past 5 months, I've been coming out of an extremely deep depression, and I'm doing much, much better now, about 5 months in, but it was really bad. And I guess to give you a little backstory, I also struggle with substance abuse, so I have been getting clean and sober over the past 5 months. Now, I wasn't using anything besides psychedelic mushrooms for the past year, but that was enough to make my life totally fall apart. And then when I quit, then the depression hit, because I was kind of using the mushrooms to self-medicate. Wow, the depression was so bad. And I've been through 12-step programs before, so I really threw myself into the meetings, and I went to a meeting every day for the first 90 days. And I'm still going to meetings regularly. And I really believe strongly in the power of the recovery program. So that's been key in my recovery. And of course, getting therapy is important. So I have a therapist as well. So when I talk about the value of video games, I'm not suggesting that they're a substitute for getting good treatment or for getting into recovery if you have substance or addiction issues. All I'm saying is that, in your own life, in your own free time, you have to find some way to structure your life. And I personally have found that video games are a really helpful way to kind of take the edge off, and especially on a weekend or a day when I don't have to go to work or something like that, it gives me a way to fill my time, and it gives me something to get out of bed for. So to give you a little background, I would say that I've struggled with depression for pretty much all of my life. I grew up in Utah in a Latter-day Saint, also known as Mormon family in St. George, Utah, and other places. And I remember being depressed off and on throughout my childhood. My dad's actually a psychologist, and I probably could have benefited from therapy, but I was never in therapy as a kid. But when I was in college, that's when I really started getting super depressed, because I went to BYU, Brigham Young University in Provo, and I'm gay, and I was there trying to not be gay and trying to find a wife and make the church work for me. And I got super depressed and started thinking about suicide, for the first time in my life in kind of a serious way. So I got some therapy, and I've tried medications off and on over the years as well. And that has been helpful at times, but I'm actually not taking medications now. I don't really like taking medications. With all due respect for those that do, sometimes I think it is necessary. But I'm a clinical psychologist, and the way that my profession treats depression is not through medication, it's through psychotherapy. And like I said, cognitive behavioral therapy is my go-to for depression. And, in some cases, depression is severe enough that you really do need medication. So I'm not saying don't use medication. But for myself, my go-to is cognitive behavioral therapy. And a lot of it is stuff that you can just apply. This is not a substitute for getting therapy for yourself, which is very important if you need that. But, I'm just sharing what I've learned from it and how I apply it in my own life. And so I was saying earlier that video games are very helpful for me, and I was also sharing about how in cognitive behavioral therapy, the strategy is called behavioral activation. So you want to try and get yourself to start doing things, because when people are depressed, sometimes they lay in bed all day long. They don't get out of bed, they don't eat, they don't do anything. And I've done that before. I've had days when I lived in New York a few years ago where I would spend the whole day in bed, not get out of bed the entire day. Boy, that was very, very unpleasant, and it's like you just wish you could go back to sleep, and you can't sleep. It's a horrible feeling. So in behavioral activation, like I said, the activities ideally are pleasurable and or masterful. And so a really good one is exercise. That's kind of like the gold standard of what we want people to do when they're depressed, because it really changes your chemistry in your body and makes you feel better. And I've actually been neglecting exercise recently and been telling myself I need to go, but kind of lacking the motivation. So definitely I think exercise is the ideal. However, I think you also have to be realistic. Sometimes when we're depressed, we're just not having it. Like I get that way sometimes where it doesn't matter what I know I should do, I just don't feel like it. And I lack the motivation. And, when you have that experience of anhedonia, where you lose interest in things and you're just so sad and so despairing, you don't care about what you should do. You're just trying to survive and make it through the day, moment to moment. So for me, video games are really powerful because they're kind of a middle ground between where I am now and where I feel I want to be, or where I should be. I think the word should is kind of dangerous. They say don't should on yourself, which is a good phrase, but it's a good middle ground because, think of it this way. If you're super depressed and all you want to do is lay in bed all day and you don't want to do anything, if there's a TV and a Nintendo Switch across the room, at the very least, why not just stand up, have a nice cup of coffee and turn on the TV, turn on the Nintendo Switch, and just play a video game for a little while. Get a comfortable, easy chair that feels like the bed. It's cozy like the bed. Put on a robe or something cozy, and just play a game. And it's like that way you're not telling yourself, oh, I have to go to the gym, I have to do this, I have to do that. Just allow yourself to be in that middle ground, that middle space where you're, it's kind of like you're sitting in bed all day. It can be like that if you're playing video games all day, which I did all weekend, I have to admit. But it actually felt really good. Because I like I said, I'm being honest with you, I really am coming out of a very, very severe depression. So that's my take on how video games really help with depression, and I'm not speaking to you as an authority, like, because I treat people with depression, which I do, and technically I am an authority because I do and have helped a lot of people with depression, and a lot of people that were suicidal and that were severely, severely depressed. But ultimately, my authority on this topic comes from my own experience, because I have struggled with super, super bad depression throughout my life. And, I don't want to use it to play the victim. I don't want to say my depression. You hear people say things like my anxiety, my ADHD, and they kind of use it as an excuse. So I don't want to use it as an excuse and talk about my depression. My depression, it's mine, and I'm gonna treasure it. No, I don't want it. But it's there, it's there, and it's often there, and it goes away. It doesn't stick around forever. It feels like it does sometimes, but it does go away. So I have some specific recommendations too for the specific video games that I think are especially helpful for someone that's depressed. So I'm very, very devoted to the Miyamoto games, the Shigeru Miyamoto games. He's the Rembrandt of video gaming. And the Mario games and the Zelda games are, in my opinion, the very best games for me, for my mood, for my well-being. The Mario games I think are great because they actually look cheerful and bright, which might be annoying when you're depressed, but don't worry, there's definitely some more depressing levels that are coming up soon. But yeah, there's just this like blue sky and the clouds, and it's great. And so also I love the Zelda games. The first one I really got into as an adult was Twilight Princess. That's an amazing game, and the reason I love that is because it actually does not look joyful. It actually feels kind of depressing. And if you're anything like me, sometimes when you're depressed, you actually want to listen to depressing music. You want to play a depressing game because you want to experience almost like an empathy or a resonance from the game. And then it's like, the way I experience it is, it's like, okay, this game is resonating with me. I feel a connection with what I feel, almost like kind of an empathy, like from the game itself. But then there will be kind of these magical moments that you experience in the game that kind of brighten your mood. So I've definitely experienced that with Twilight Princess. And then the other one is Skyward Sword, which I'm playing right now because it's on the Nintendo Switch. And it's a really fun game to play if you've played the following two games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which are both amazing. And it's interesting because when you play Skyward Sword, after playing these newer games, you can see that it was the game that preceded those games, and it's kind of fun to see how the mechanics developed and evolved. And another thing I want to share, this will be my last point, is that sometimes when you play a new game, it might not feel fun. Like, it might actually just feel like, because when you're depressed, you're anhedonic sometimes, and things don't interest you. So I remember when Breath of the Wild came out, I'd gotten really into Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword in the years prior, and I just spent years anticipating Breath of the Wild, and it took so many years to come out, and I was, following every little detail I could online and visiting GameStop constantly to see any new updates and any little image or poster or video or anything I could find online was like keeping me going. So then when it finally came out, I will never forget this. I started playing it. It was really fun and exciting at first. And then after a few hours, I just thought, I'm just not enjoying this game, and I realized that eventually I fell in love with it, and it's an incredible game, as is the one after Tears of the Kingdom. But I realized that part of that is because those were such sprawling open world games and they didn't give you nearly as much direction. Like the whole idea is that it's this big sandbox that you can go play in. And you can go on all these different quests, and there is a main quest, but you kind of have to either buy a book or follow an online guide if you really want to be guided in how to follow the main quest, which I did. Like that's actually what I usually end up doing is I end up buying a book to guide me through the games. So yeah, which actually is fun in and of itself. You know, I don't really enjoy struggling forever and ever trying to figure out some puzzle or what do I have to do next or if I'm stuck in a game. So those game guides, the official ones, are really beautiful art books as well. So it's fun to use those, and it's fun to go without them. You know, both ways are fun. So anyway, I think that's about enough for today. But I hope that you're all doing okay. If you're depressed, remember, you're not going through this alone, okay? There are lots of us that feel this way. The whole world's in a mental health crisis, and I'm a psychologist that helps other people with depression, and sometimes I feel like I don't, you know, if people knew how I felt inside, sometimes I can barely, you know, make it through the day and get to work. It's a good thing I have work because it gets my mind off of what I'm going through, but I haven't been happy the past few months. I really haven't. I kind of wanted to start this channel just to sort of reach out to other people that might be going through something similar, who are also video game fans, and we can share our enthusiasm for video games while also support each other with what we're going through. So yeah, we're in this together. It's the hero's journey, okay? So hang in there, take it one day at a time, and hope you have a beautiful day. Love you.